All right, Max, and anybody else watching this, another intense one to review. This is Nat Turner by Kyle Baker. Yeah, we're going right from War on Gaza, which is a hard read, a good book but a hard read, to another really good book but a hard read. The author pretty much opens up, I think, in the intro here, saying that you know they like in practically every history book there is a little appendix during like the 1800s of a slave revolt led by Nat Turner, but it gets like a paragraph and that's it. And I remember very much reading something like this in a history book growing up. Didn't think much of the actual story behind it. This is that story brought to life. I think they made this into a Broadway play, perhaps. But like, um, no, maybe not. I might be mixing up a different one that I'm reading about, a different insurrection in now Haiti. So anyway, ignore that. Maybe they did. I don't know. But it would be one bloody play, I'll tell you that, because there is a crazy amount of violence in this one. So yeah, but the story is Nat Turner, an oppressed slave, decides to revolt and gets an assembly of people in the South to uprise, and it turns into a very bloody conquest, which is squelched. And we all, the history summary that you would read in that paragraph in every book, you kind of know what's going to happen. But still, just like seeing it brought to life and the color to the story, like just the beats of. Well, I'll get into it as we review it, but that high level, that's the story. Predominantly in the United States, although there's also a little bit at the beginning in Western Africa, very likely. We'll review that too. So starting off with the characters. So not surprising, Nat Turner, he is the main character of this story. He is seen at various parts of his life. You see him sort of formally get introduced at the beginning of like the second chapter here, I believe. As a child, you watch him grow up. You watch him try to help his dad not get caught. You watch him get married. You watch like a tragic separation of his family. You watch him undergo his own metamorphosis. He basically is not, no one at this time, no slave at this time is allowed to read. He like is incredibly smart, gets educated secretly. He becomes like incredibly well versed on the Bible and develops his own very strong feelings of like called to do this very violent thing. It's very interesting kind of how the spiritual dimension winds through this. So Nat Turner's easily the main story. There's lots of other ancillary characters you see along the way. You see some of his like ancestors, like his mom, I believe, who's like brought from, again, some part of likely West Africa. I think, like, as far as I could tell reading up, they don't know exactly where his ancestry is from, or if I don't even know if they're sure if his like mom exactly came from Africa either. But that's what they do in the story. I believe that. And other characters like other slaves, other people that are punished for their own versions of trying to communicate secretly or learn secretly, blah blah blah. And then obviously there's the people that they murder at the end of the story. Well, I think that's probably enough for the characters part. So characters wise, Nat Turner's a fascinating character. He's for obvious reasons at certain points of this, it's like he's a mixed character because they do atrocious things in the arc of the story, albeit for reasons that make a lot of sense. But yeah, so the characters I thought overall strong. Nat Turner's just fascinating, and there's like some other characters you kind of get to know. I think one, I'll get into some of the stuff in the next art section and the history culture, but I kind of wish I would have been able to learn a little bit more about some of the other characters, but yeah, I'll talk about that in art and history. So maybe I'll do these two together because I think they're very combined. So I already showed a bunch of the pages of the art. I normally talk about this. I'm not a huge fan of when the color is like totally removed from the story, and I don't think there's a single page in here where there's like color, outside of black and white, gray, like a sepia thing. But there are just such, like, in my criteria of how good, how strong of a component of this work of art do I think this component is, and how much would it make me want to like reread and re-experience this work of art. Some of the drawings are so good. I know I already showed this, but I just think it's incredibly moving and vivid. And I'm not going to spoil a lot of this because there's some darker, more heavy ones. But like, I think the art sticks with you from this story. It is very strong. Same time, do I think they could have made it even bigger and splashier with a little bit of color? And probably so. Some of the other things I really enjoyed as well were just these incredibly good facial expressions. Like, I just, he's, you can see him here kind of like, he basically pretends to be like not knowing how to read and kind of this goofy face, and the guy like doesn't get him in too much trouble for like having a Bible, but you can see obviously he's very like mad on the inside. And this happens more than once where there's like some really good facial expressions throughout the book. So I think the art's really strong. And in terms of the history culture, I think this is an 8. This almost, again, to me, this shows just an actual piece of history, right? Like it's a brutal piece of history, right? It involves, a very, I think, accurate depiction of the slave ships, capturing people, and just the brutality of it, like the absolute brutality of like living in slavery, getting families separated, and also the actual uprising, right? Like, they don't hold anything back. You see gory details. So very accurate. I think one of the things that, sometimes things cannibalize themselves a bit in the score. I think one of the choices they made, which was so fascinating in this book, is for a while, I was like the first entire chapter, which might be like, what? Over 50 pages. So there's a massive chunk of this book where you got almost no dialogue. I thought how this book began, you might get like absolutely like it might just be pictures the entire time, essentially, like maybe a word here or there, like chapter titles and things. So I thought, again, this I give a good X Factor score, I think, for this book as well. But one of the things I do think might have helped the history cultural aspect a little bit would be like a little bit more exposition. Like I think that there was some stuff I literally had to like look up later because I couldn't figure out exactly what was happening. They include a nice glossary in here, but it's really just yeah. So anyway, like don't want to take away from it. Great book. I still had to like look up, for instance, like where they were alluding to that like the original family was from in Africa, and just some other stuff. It was a little bit, it jumps around temporally a little bit too, so it was just a little hard to tell sometimes exactly. They would interrupt the story with like a different other person at points, and I couldn't tell if this was like a past or future thing. So you soak up a lot of what's happening. I still think that like that hurts a little bit, just the overall one. It's a, like, the war on Gaza, which I just reviewed, it's brutally clear about exactly what it's thinking, and and it's capturing like a very clear moment in time and space, just like this is, and it's about like an atrocious thing, like a bad time and a harsh reality reaction. But anyway, so that's kind of where that came from. And then in terms of the readability, I thought this was the weakest part of this book, and probably not for the reasons I would. Again, normally I think my readability is more like, oh, there's too many words here. It's and I'm going to definitely review a book soon which has this exact problem of it's almost trying to be a history book, which I don't think is what you want to do with a graphic novel. I think you want to let the medium really shine. And in terms of balancing like the art and stuff, like they really do have, it's very readable in the sense of like you could fly through the first 60 pages or so of this story, and it doesn't slow you down because of the words exactly. But I think the biggest parts that hurt the readability for me is like honestly, this is a gruesome book. Like it is hard to read. Like we just reviewed The War on Gaza, which is a hard book, but it's 32 pages, and the style of the art makes it a little less jarring. But yeah, you're seeing people get killed in their beds. You're seeing some awful stuff in the slave ships, and the process before that. You're seeing like children getting decapitated. It does not hold back, and some of that just, you know, like for anyone that's ever watched Passion of the Christ, even if you feel like that's a good movie, just like watching somebody get flogged for 2 hours, it's just like, well, it's not a low friction thing. It almost like you would have to build up maybe to read this, because it can be a really hard book, just because of the brutality and how well they capture it. It's very realistic. The other part that I think just hurt the readability for me, I already explained. Sometimes I think this would benefit with a little bit more text at points. Like it definitely doesn't slow you down that it's just pictures, but sometimes you're like trying to figure out what's happening. The other thing I found challenging is that it's a cool artistic decision. Again, this is like where the X factor gets strengthened, but they basically don't do something like I would associate with a normal graphic novel, where they would take the source material and then turn it into a dialogue between the characters and stuff. What you get, as far as I can understand it, is like actual excerpts from his confession, Nat Turner. You're getting like big blocks of text that he told to the person that recorded his confession before he was killed. And some of it is just the challenge of like the slightly different ways people talked a couple hundred years ago, and like the English of it being a little different. Some of it's just that like, yeah, some like until you get to certain parts, I just had trouble following exactly what was meant by some of it. So yeah, again, I think rarely do I say that there's almost like some like this book sometimes just felt like there were like sometimes too many and other times not enough words. Like sometimes you got these big blocks of text where you finally, it was very clear what was happening. They could have maybe just explained those parts with pictures, and other parts where like absolutely nothing but action, and it wasn't clear. Like, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that maybe is a critique. But finally, I think for the X Factor part, a super strong X Factor, because there's just so, again, like I hadn't read a comic book quite structured like this. You also get things like the straight up history, like the list of the people that were killed. You get diagrams of the slave ships. Like you get a big chunk of his actual confession at the very end in kind of like a stylized way. And I've probably already showed enough about the art that I think is unique, and almost the subject matter. This is a hard, this is, again, not for the faint of heart to read this if you're squeamish about blood and some sensitive stuff like that. But so for all that, to me, it added up in this, a very unique thing. And also just, again, tackling this thing which often is lost in the history books. And in the theme of the previous war in Gaza, it feels like another one of these things where there's, in the Catholic world, I guess we'd say there's like, the ends and the means, right? And the people doing, the people enslaving people, bringing them over and then mistreating them in just such horrific ways. They're like the horrible means and horrible ends. Like they're trying to dehumanize people, use them up, and also they're doing it in such a god-awful way. Nat Turner and the story of this revolution, the ends they want to get are actually totally reasonable, which is why I think there's some like real respect for Nat Turner, showing that people that often feel disenfranchised and powerless actually can do some massive things that, again, now are in every single history book, basically, about this time in the United States. But obviously, there's also this kind of descent into madness that the book captures really well, too, where once they cross this bridge and they start killing not just people in their beds in their sleep, but like the children and infants, and they literally start getting drunk on their own power, and literally drunk by like stealing lots of alcohol and getting so drunk that they end up killing themselves essentially because they're like falling off their horses in front of people with weapons and blah, blah, blah. I think it brilliantly captures the tension of these kinds of things, where the thing that is being aimed for, like freedom and respect, like being not dehumanized, totally right. And at the same time, if you're getting to the point where you're axing off people's heads willy-nilly, yeah, you're going to kind of descend into madness and get sin, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, trying not to. It definitely, I would say this was a very impactful book. It sticks in the mind. Overall, 6.2, definitely above average score. I think the art is visceral. It sticks with you. It is like a very unique book, like the subject matter, the way it's done. So all of it, I would say, if you can handle this kind of a book, is like really worth a read. I think you're never going to get this in a normal history class. So I'll leave it there. Nat Turner.